conversation. So a lot of times when we think about business, we're just down here at the bottom of the triangle. ROI is return on investment. And we're just measuring the how much we're making. And it's rather unimaginative. A little higher up in more higher functioning companies, there's this openness to new ideas. But the actual really interesting spot is when we get to this point of significance or why we're doing things, which is what's the value that I'm creating. If any of you can look at this video, it's really interesting. It's Simon Sinek, S-Y-N-E-K, I think, and it's called The Golden Circle. And he talks a lot about why do we do things. And great leaders and great companies have a why. And one of his examples is Martin Luther King. You know, and his why was he had this dream. It wasn't just about, equal bus seats. He was about a much bigger why. It was compelling. An inclusive vision. Right? And that inspired a lot of change. If you think about a company like Apple, right? Their why is sort of interesting. I know I have an IBM guy in the room, so I'm or a PC guy, but Apple, at least they talked about their why as teaching people to think different and to be creative. It's not just about selling you a computer. It is. I mean, you wind up buying one, but right? It's sort of like, oh, what would happen if we thought different? And what would you be? What would happen if your job was to be part of a group of people that helped people think differently and more effectively? That might be exciting. And that's the kind of place that you can take mindfulness into. So all of this is sort of a long thing about business, because to me, if you think positive and you have an appreciation of the why and what you're trying to do, then it makes sense to bring mindfulness into your work. If you have a very dreary outlook about your employment, then it'll be harder. It's not impossible, but it's much more challenging. So I wanted to point at the positive. So what is mindfulness at work? There's a definition that gets used a lot. I'm going to actually go with my definition. This is my definition. It's purposeful, open, attentive presence. So think about being at whatever you do. And you're there purposefully. Like you show up on Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday, you show up tomorrow and you're ready. Like, I'm here. I'm going to do what I do, and I'm going to, put myself into it and enjoy it as much as it is enjoyable. I once worked for about a year as the deli and produce manager at a very small store in New Jersey. And there wasn't a lot of joy in doing the, pound of ham sliced thin, and then pound of cheese sliced, thin, But there was not. Well, I still have the pleasure of the movement. Right? And it's like, could you do it? It's a little bit like a dance. And could you could you flirt with the customer? Because they did better, then they went and told the boss, I like him. And then the boss came and said, you're not too bad for a college guy. He didn't like college guys. Can you take yourself into it on purpose and fully and try to do the best you can? If not, you should be asking a question, why am I here? You should call a coach. Open. The open is the point of view that anything can happen, and pretty much everything will happen. I've been hired and fired and disappointed and successful and complimented and yelled at. How about you? I see a lot of nods. Right? I've gotten A's and gotten F's in college. I know there's at least a few students here. One of the best things I ever got back was a thing on an English paper. It was supposed to be a 3-page paper on Victorian poetry. I hate Victorian poetry. I find it boring. If anybody here is a Victorian poetry expert, I apologize. So I decided to write mine on the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, which was neither Victorian nor poetry, in the sense that this paper was assigned. And it was supposed to be 3 pages. It was a page and a quarter. And I didn't start it until 10 hours before it was due. So, and I got the mark back with a big red F circled and a see me after class. And then, the teacher said to me afterwards, it's been a great story since this is 40 years ago, right? She said to me, I've read a lot of good short papers. This isn't one of them. That was a good lesson, right? And I didn't, now, can you be open to somebody saying, you didn't hit it? Like, you didn't do any of the things I asked you to do. It hurt, and I didn't like the F, and I went out grumbling, and then I thought about it. Right? So mindfulness is like I could be open. I also had papers where somebody said, this is brilliant, a lot easier to take. But you never notice when somebody compliments you, sometimes it's hard to just say thanks. So can you just be open? Open to success, open to failure, open to everything that happens. And the attentive presence doesn't really need a lot of explanation. Like, can you actually just be here? Present. You think about the amount of time we spend at work where we're there, we're on the clock, but are we actually present? And I think that's an interesting, calculation to do. So let's go back to our 3 breaths again. Because all of that is about bringing yourself back present. So another interruption, another gap. You just take a breath in, and you're just connecting to how it feels right now. Maybe you're going, this isn't what I expected, or this is better than I expected. Let me know. Breath goes out, another breath comes in. Breath goes out. Maybe your sense is open. To me, the room feels a bit cool, but I like it cool. You might hear the air handling system, whatever you're sensing. You're just open to what's going on. All right, do the look around thing. Or the wiggling thing. I'm going to talk about why that works in a minute, but it's a good thing to know. All right. Like I said, we have this one word, mindfulness. I love this character. I'm told that it translates directly as warm, open, heart, mind. And I thought this word cloud was evocative for me of how we have the one word mindfulness, but it has a lot of things in it. So it has social emotional learning, social emotional intelligence, the idea of presence, attention, concentration. It might be religious, it might be completely secular. It has a lot of stuff in it. There's a definition of mindfulness that gets used an awful lot by Dr. Jon Kabat-Zinn. He's the author of this definition. Mindfulness is paying attention in the present moment on purpose in a particular way. So I'm going to go back. Paying attention in the present moment on purpose in a particular way. I just took it and said it a little differently. Because this, I believe, completely goes with work. Purposeful, open, attentive presence. So, I'm sort of a little bit embarrassed because I've now quoted myself on 2 different slides. And it's a little bit humbling to have a slide and have my own quote at the top. Right? But this is sort of like Yoda. It's impossible to define what cannot be put into words. We're talking about an experience. Well, let's do the breath thing again. Right, just one. We can talk about it, but we can't capture it in a word. So you could say it is non-conceptual, or another way of saying that is it's experiential. It's an experience to have rather than an idea to capture and nail down, which is why there are so many different words and descriptions of it. Here's Dr. Kabat-Zinn's definition from 1990, paying attention in a particular way on purpose, which we read. He had another one in 2005. What I liked was these are 3 from Dr. Kabat-Zinn, and they evolve. So paying attention in a particular way, open-hearted, moment-to-moment, non-judgmental awareness, the ultimate challenge and practice. So 1990, 20 years later, calling it the ultimate challenge. He's a very interesting person. University of Massachusetts Hospital in, I think it was the mid-1970s. He's a psychologist, and he wants to work with people who are experiencing pain. And he says to the rest of the medical team, give me the folks that you've tried everything for and there's no more help. Like they're still in pain. The pain meds didn't work, the physical therapy didn't work. Just give me the ones you've run out of solutions for and I'll give it a try. And then he started to teach them mindfulness for pain reduction and for stress reduction. And over the course of years has proven that it actually is very helpful. It doesn't make the pain go away, but it changes the experience, which is sort of elusive. We're in a culture that we want the pill or the fix, right? The app to make it go away. Right? But it's not quite like that. It's a little bit more subtle and experiential. And this is a quote from my teacher, Mipam Rinpoche. It's a Tibetan title. What we are trying to achieve is a mind that is stable and calm. And then the rest of it's on there. I'll read it just because it's a great quote. What we begin to discover is that this calmness is a natural aspect of our mind. Think about what that would be like at work. If amid all the stresses, and there's a lot of stress in many of our workplaces, if you could actually tune into a natural calmness. Through mindfulness, we are just developing and strengthening that calmness, and eventually we are able to remain peacefully in our mind without struggling. That's sort of the bigger target. So it's not just about breathing and lowering our blood pressure. It's actually, could I develop a quality of calm, awake, clear, helpful, and in the context of work, value-producing presence? Calm, clear, wakeful, helpful, cheerful, value-producing presence. That actually would be worth something. I don't know about you. I've had a few employers who wouldn't have understood calm and cheerful. They were sort of angry and loud, and they could have used some help. So let's talk a little bit about the science. In 1975 or so, when Dr. Zinn started his work with the mindfulness thing, they didn't have the same, science just wasn't where it's at the moment. We didn't have the MRIs and the CT scanners and the, they're just, if there were a few, there were few, and there weren't enough to actually use them to be judging, like, how does mindfulness work? They might have put electrodes on somebody's head to measure the alpha waves or the frequency of waves, but they couldn't actually go inside the skull to see what was actually happening inside the brain tissue. And they certainly couldn't go in and see what was the effect of the density of tissue on the density of tissue to practice. So over the last 30 years, science and computer imaging and measurements have grown exponentially. And there have been a wave in the last 10 years of experiments that are classical science experiments, the whole double-blind thing. Let's pretend it was this group. This group gets taught mindfulness, and this group gets taught positive psychology, right? How to think happy thoughts. And then we put you all through an MRI, and we take a picture of your brain, lots of little slices of the inside, what's your brain look like. And then you get 8 weeks of training, and you practice mindfulness 15 minutes a day, and at the end we take the same picture. And you folks have gotten, the same amount of teaching of how to think happy thoughts, and we take the picture at the end. At the end, very little, if anything, has changed in your brains. You might be happier, but there's no significant change inside. But this group inside, depending on what they're measuring, and what the science has shown in different sets of experiments that take a long time to talk about, one set shows that there are structural changes. That the amount and the density of tissue in certain parts of your brain, like the amygdala, which is very related to your emotional reactivity, that decreases for mindfulness practitioners. And then the assumption, and it's an assumption that needs to be proven, because the science is still young, is that a decreased size in the amygdala will mean decreased emotional reactivity. That's a big assumption, but we're a lot ahead before we couldn't see anything that was going on. There are also tests that show that not only that, but like what parts of the brain that get activated during the same stress. So imagine a different experiment. We give you all the same stress, and this side gets highly agitated, and this side at the beginning is equally agitated, but at the end it's like less. It's still responding, but less. Right? So there's something going on in the brain that's related to this training. And the thing about the wiggling hands, right? There's a very interesting set of experiments that show that when you do the 3-breath thing, so I'm going to say this and then invite you to do it again, that what happens is we're sort of evolutionarily, if you'll allow me that, evolutionarily predisposed to having our attention outwardly focused. That's how we survive. The ears are picking up, the eyes are picking up, you know, the nose is picking up if it can, like we're just outwardly focused. And then you take the breath and the attention goes in. So you actually activate a different part of your brain. And a lot of people, when they do this, they automatically close their eyes. My teacher taught us to do it with our eyes open. It doesn't matter. Either way, your attention will go to the deeper mid parts of your brain, from the visual cortex to the deep brain and the midbrain. But you're at work. Like you got to answer the next phone call or do the next email. So you want to bring yourself back. So the fastest way is bring the attention back. And I know this from EMDR or eye movement reprocessing and desensitizing. You look at the 4 corners and you trigger what's called the reorienting reflex. So you reorient your attention back out. So that's why I'm going to say let's do it again. So let's take our attention in for 3 breaths. And then you might just, this time I'll try to talk less, just what do you notice? Maybe you don't notice anything, that's okay too. And then bring your awareness back out. The re-triggering thing, fingers, toes, look around, however you do it. Right? If you do that enough, I know from my own experience and from what has been journaled and written about and studied for actually thousands of years, that you will notice the difference between the calmness of looking within and the action and the engagement of looking out. It's not like one's good and the other's bad. We need both. So we're really talking more about balance. But it's interesting. The balance has this side and that side. It has the outside and the inside. Often at our work, I think we get addicted to the outer focus, the activity focus, and we neglect the inner to our detriment. So let's do a different practice. I call this the 3 R's practice. It's rest is the first R. Rest your attention with your breath. So this is taking what we've done and actually expanding it a bit. Recognize the second R. Recognize when your attention wanders. So we're going to do a little bit longer here. Like maybe 2 minutes instead of 45 seconds. It'll seem like an hour, but it'll be about 2 minutes. Right? So rest, recognize, and when your attention wanders, that's okay. You know, many people say, and I teach meditation and mindfulness a lot, and they say that they want to have no thoughts. And I want to just tell you at the very beginning, that's impossible. What do you call a person without thoughts? Dead. They're a corpse, right? Even if you're in a deep coma, something's going on. Some kind of something is happening. Right? So we're alive, so we're going to have thoughts. So you just recognize when your attention drifts away. You're practicing the attention muscle. If it's not a muscle, but let's go with the metaphor. Right? And then you just bring your attention back. You return it to the breath. What's a little bit elusive about this is when you say rest on the breath, a lot of times when folks hear that, they want to like grab hold of the breath. Too much. Too much. Right? So, very gentle. It's more like watching a wave come in and then watching it go out. Right? It's very peaceful. Right? It's not trying hard. Right? It's actually more challenging if you just let it happen. Right? So you're resting your attention on the breath. So let's try it. I'm going to time it, and I'm going to say let's go for 2 minutes. So you're breathing in and out. When your attention wanders, just notice that you've wandered off the breath, and very gently bring the attention back. When you're ready, you could bring your attention back to its customary focus. Do the look around, the finger wiggling thing. That particular practice that we just did has a Sanskrit name. Shamatha Vipassana. It's one of the thousands of types of mindfulness. It literally means, if you translated it into English, dwelling peacefully, generating clear insight. So that's what we were doing. Like warm, open heart, mind. This one was calming the mind and allowing a place for insight to arise. It usually takes more than 2 minutes for insight, but maybe you noticed something. So anybody notice anything? What'd you notice? What'd you learn? Anybody?
It felt good. I felt my mind got a bit more clear.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Anybody's mind not get clear? Anybody noticed that they were busy-minded? I see one hand. 2, 3. Right. Anybody not notice that they had thoughts? It actually happens occasionally that somebody will have this really calm period. Everybody noticed thoughts? Right. A lot of the very old texts say that we have thousands and thousands of thoughts per minute and perceptions, and we're just not noticing the stream. It's just going by so fast. So there's something about slowing down that you begin to notice, which might be helpful in creating value, because you might notice something that you've previously not been paying attention to. So there's a reason why this has a value and why it would be helpful at work. Let's go on. we're going to skip this one. Practice in the gaps. So this actually comes from a story that a very senior teacher told me, and he told me about talking to his grandmother. And his grandmother was dying. And in the Tibetan way of thinking about this, there are physical signs of when a person is enlightened. There are certain things happen around them. And there was grandmother, and this was a very famous teacher, and grandmother was exhibiting all the signs of enlightenment. And he was the famous one, and he's at her deathbed, and he goes, "How did it happen, grandmother, that you've achieved this?" And she said, "I practiced in the gaps." And he said, "What gaps?" This is the inspiration for this talk. And she said, "Well, the gap between cooking and fetching the water. Between fetching the water and getting the wood. Between getting the wood and diapering you. And then cleaning the house. And then, right, there were lots of gaps. And she had used the everyday details of her life as an opportunity to tune into that clear, insight-generating space." So he was this famous monk, and he had spent years and years in a monastery like me, and he thought he was groovy, and she was the one that was enlightened. So I think of this as grandmother wisdom, right? That it's actually for ordinary folks like you and I who have jobs. Right? So this is applied mindfulness. This is about practicing in the gap. And what I would say to you about work is that there's lots of gaps at work. So I'm going to ask you to think about that and talk to each other in a moment about that. But there are lots of gaps. It's not just one solid thing. You know, one of my jobs, I've had like a whole string of jobs in my life. One of my jobs, I worked in a bubblegum factory. It's a summer job. I only lasted for 3 days because it was my version of hell is working in the bubblegum factory, because I would come out, it was bubble yum, if any of you remember bubble yum. I smelled like bubble yum, right? Everything. I'd go to my girlfriend, I'd smell like bubble yum. It's like, no thanks. This pink thing. And my job was to take a wooden thing of bubble yum, a wooden plank with 10 ropes of bubble yum about this long, and move it from here to here where somebody fed it into a machine. And I did that. I was the bubble rum rope mover. Right? Right? I did that maybe 5,000 times a day, but I did it once, right? And then once again. Even the most repetitive thing has a gap. There's this, and then there's this. And then there's the gap where I'm turning back around to get the next one. Right? So work is full of gaps. Even this. Now there's the next one. There's something to pay attention to. Right? When you're slicing, if you don't recognize this, I'm slicing meat in a deli. Right? Right? From my deli job. Right? Right? There's gaps in everything. Right? There's gaps in programming, there's gaps in counseling, there's gaps in everything. So this is actually a sign from the subway, I think, in the UK. Right? This is the gap between the platform and the subway car. Do you remember what they said in France? We were in France last year, and we started to laugh because they said it in French, but it was peculiarly French. It was like, "Don't fall in the hole between the car." It meant mind the gap, but it was very direct, right? So it's sort of like this, mind the gap. Don't fall in the hole would not have gotten a lot of people here. So this actually started with a personal discovery. And this actually was the job, that I had in between 1 year of retreat and the next. So the way that my retreat practice worked, I would go for a year. The traditional thing is go for 3 years, 3 months, and 3 weeks, and whatever. A whole bunch of threes. But my teacher didn't want us to do that. He wanted us to actually mix the mindfulness practice with living a regular life. So I would go to the monastery for a year, and then I'd come home. Those of you who are clinical counselors can imagine what that did to my practice. Right? It disappeared. Right? Because you can't say to people, "I'll be back in a year." Right? That's, your next appointment is a year from now. Right? That doesn't work. Right? So in between my first year and my second year, a friend gave me a job. So I was working, answering the phones in this company that was an import-export company that sold drugs. And 200 times a day, the phone would ring, and my job was to, between the first ring and the second ring, I wasn't psychic, I couldn't pick it up before the first ring, but between the first ring and the second ring, I had to pick it up and say, hello, XYZ company, you know, whatever. And we didn't have caller ID, so hello, XYZ company, can I help you? And then they would tell me their problem. It happened about 200 times in a day. After my first week, I'm like ready to drive a stake in my head. I'm like, this is really painful. And it's, you know, people yelling at me because their carpet's not there. Like, I'm sitting in an office in Vancouver, the carpet's in Georgia. Right? You know, the truck broke down. Like, what can I do? You know, well, can you get it for me? I'm like, I'm in Yaletown. I can't say that because then I'll get fired, right? So it's like figuring out how to relate with folks, right? But at the end of that first week, it was really painful. I went home and I thought, wait a minute, the teachings that I'm learning are how to put together mindfulness and regular life. And then I had a brainstorm. Let's make it like a game. So when the phone would ring, the game was, could I become mindful between the first ring and the second ring? Like, could I tune in, take a breath, and pick up the phone? 200 times a day, 1,000 times a week, 50,000 times that year. Right? It was really, you know, at the end of the first week, it felt great. At the end of a month, the guy who hired me thought I was going to quit. He's like, why are you still at this job? You're like a clinical counselor, you've got a master's degree. I said, I'm having too good of a time. This is really fun. He's like, really? And he's another meditation practitioner. I told him what I was doing. He said, nah. But it works. So that's a gap between one phone ring and the next. So what I would like to ask you to do, this is sort of the audience participation part of the evening. What about complicated tasks and leadership tasks? There's a whole thing in positive psychology that, you know, if a task is really simple and doesn't require a lot of creativity, you can just do it repetitively. But the more creative and, you know, the more agency you have in what you do, so all of you who are counselors, which is very creative, you have to be there, you're thinking on your feet, mindfulness is very helpful. It would also help if you were the, you know, the guy or the gal at McDonald's making French fries, which doesn't have a lot of creativity. It's timed to the minute. It's more helpful the more creative and the more independent you are. So here's the audience participation part. So I'd like you to just talk to the person next to you. So in groups of 2 or 3. And what I would like you to think about, and I'm going to ask you to share this in a second. And of course, if you don't want to do it, don't do it. You can talk about whatever you want. And if you don't want to talk to anybody, I guess you can just sit there. So it's whatever you want to do. You know, it's completely up to you. But here's what I'd like you to think about. Could you think about what the gaps are at your work? Because this is Mind the Gap, practicing in the gaps. So, and I'll give you the hint that they will be between tasks. So it's up to you, like, what are the tasks that I have gaps between? Or during a pause, like something's happening and then there's a break, right? Or moments of change in activity, or moments in an automated process where you're passive, or downtime. Maybe you can think of others, right? And when we get to, I'm going to ask you to share what you come up with. So, and then I'm going to ask Margaret if you'll write some of them down on the flip chart when we get there. So if you would just take like 4 or 5 minutes and talk to the person next to you and see if you can identify some gaps.
Yeah.
about this half of the room? Are we ready to bring it back? So I had originally planned this exercise in 2 parts, and it looks like you just did the first part great, and I'd like to put it together with the second part, which was I was going to ask, how can you practice mindfulness with the gap you've identified? So if somebody could share a gap, and then maybe you could talk about what you would do to practice mindfulness in that gap, or we'll see if somebody else has a suggestion. I've got hundreds of them, but I'd be interested in what you think. So can anybody share a gap that you identified? Yeah.
My gaps are huge. I'm
Huge.
deployed, so I have like 2-day gaps sometimes.
Uh-huh.
And I think the goal is like to kind of get back into it, and then I would start to long for the moments that I have no gaps, where I'm just working and the flow is there.
Uh-huh.
So I'm in a creative field, and for me, gaps are almost like, it's like writer's block, you know?
Right.
So how can I use that to sort of jump off into the next phase of my work?
How can you use the experience of like the writer's block?
Yes,
to jump
just
off?
the gap.
Anybody have any thoughts? I have one, but I'm sort of curious. There's lots of intelligent folks in the room.
I think if I was doing creative projects and then there was a gap, I would want to refresh myself. I'd want to get back in touch with my own creativity rather than applied creativity. So focusing in would be helpful.
Okay. But this was your first name?
Demir.
Demir. But that's not what Demir said.
Okay.
So that sounds great. I think I would actually be very similar, but you're saying the gap, you actually want to get back in to the process.
Exactly.
Right?
I want to leave the gap because the gaps are too big for me at the moment. I'm in the gap too long. I'm thinking too much. I'm too inward. I need to create more. And for me, the gaps, they're too deep.
All right. So you just gave us a big hint. But anybody else a thought on what you might...
Brian, so we could hear.
The hint?
No, yeah.
The gaps are too long. And you said something else there. That,
Too deep.
You need to, was
They're
that?
too deep, or hard to get
Too
out.
deep, hard to get out of.
Yeah.
That was the hint. So,
I think maybe start have self-awareness of having these thoughts, just by having that, oh, I'm starting impatient again about having the anxiety about how to fill in the gap. That's how I
so some kind of awareness of whatever your internal story is about that. Right? This is too deep. It's lasting too long. However, but I don't want to put a label on it. And then, so bringing some curiosity to it, right? Which is actually a purposeful, attentive, open awareness. It's open because you're not trying to change anything yet. You're just noticing what's there. And it's purposeful because you're actually, instead of jumping off of the gap, you're actually noticing like what's happening right now. And it's a very present moment because that's what's happening. Right? So I think that was good. I saw one more hand, and then I'm going to offer a suggestion.
Yeah, well, I guess I'm thinking of the word resistance and how when we're resisting what is, it's very draining because we're losing energy because we're resisting what is.
Yeah.
So if there's a way, and this is my understanding of mindfulness, is a way to be nourished by the moment that we're in, rather than spinning our wheels resisting it.
Right.
So what I heard you say is if there's a way to bring awareness to the resistance in such a way that we can come back to being here with what is, we could be nourished by it.
Yeah. So that's really very much to the point. I think what I would suggest would shorten the gap, but it'll, it's your gap and your process, right? Would be to bring your attention to whatever that experience is, the uncomfortableness, the sort of this is going on for a long time quality, however you, and to just let yourself be curious about it. And for me, if I were doing that, I would be allowing myself to notice the breath, and then whatever other physical sensations or mental storms I was having. I was getting ready for this talk tonight, and I was feeling anxious because I don't really know you guys, and feeling the butterflies. right? And going, okay, that's how it feels. I'm going to talk about mindfulness. What I'm mindful of right now is yikes, right? And but it's not good, not bad, which is the open quality. Right? So a couple of breaths, notice, and then maybe you have to do something to reset, like whatever your ritual or your creative thing is. But then you could go back to a couple of breaths, notice, and do little bits of it, right? Until it feels like you want to do more. So that would be mine. Another gap? You have another gap?
Well, you can take a moment and activate your chi.
You can. Another mindfulness practice. You can bring your energy, and do the chi type exercises.
Just kind of feel more.
Yeah.
Some healing touch first.
Yeah.
Can you repeat, Ryan?
So you could bring your energy, your physical energy, or your chi up, and then take a moment and touch your face and feel that sort of loving, healing attention to yourself. Let's have another gap, another identified gap. And if there's one that's work-related, I really appreciate it, Demir, yours. Another work gap. Somebody.
You already mentioned it, but I'm noticing that I'll see with an email, for instance, I'll see the name of the person sending, and I may know already, anticipate maybe what kind of email I'm going to get.
Mm-hmm.
So then right there, right before I open and read it, that's my gap to be present.
Great.
So then when I read it, I'm more aware of what is actually being said.
Right.
So right before email reading.
Yeah. That's really an excellent one, right? To pause. So, and I think I'm just going to repeat what you said. Like before you jump into the email and you think you know what they're going to say, and I'm just going to step over here and go, how many of us have read the email thinking that we knew what they were going to say and then replied and then read it and went, oops. I'm not the only one, right? So, so you take a pause. Good time to take a breath in. Like, chill. Take a chill moment. Okay, now I'm going to read it. It's from Billy. Billy's a pain in the neck. Or it's from Joe. I didn't get that project done. Or it's from Sally. She's my boss. I was late 3 times this week. Whatever. I don't know. And then read it. And then, before you start replying, you could take another breath. Right? The disastrous thing about email is that it is anti-gap. Because it feels very satisfying to type and hit return, and then it feels like you did something. But you might have just stirred the hornet's nest and not really accomplished anything. Right? So it's very useful to inject the gap, right? And then use it to be mindful. Somebody else?
I was going to say, context of computers, right? The question is, mindfulness. Some therapists recommend that you push your own delete button as a way of creating your gap. Would you endorse that as part of mindfulness, or add something else?
I think so. So the suggestion is, as some therapists using a computer metaphor suggest pushing one's own delete button. How would I do that?
So as
You asked me if I would endorse it, and I want to ask a field testing question before I say yes or no.
Oh, are you asking me or just asking?
You.
Oh, so that as you're having this chatter and not being able to have a clear and open mind, you say, okay, I'm going to stop it by pushing my internal delete button, and that'll clear that away and open my mind.
So if that works for you, I think, yeah, go ahead. Yeah. The way I was taught, which is sort of like that, but the delete button sort of has like a smiley face on it or something. It's actually to notice that I have that internal chatter and accept that it's going on, and then say enough. So that's but there's an acceptance before the delete. So it actually takes away, because the delete might be, and why I wanted to ask you the question, it could be a bit aggressive to yourself, like those thoughts are not okay, and they just might be the thoughts I have. Like, I see that email, I have those thoughts. It's like, okay, have those thoughts because we've had this email exchange 20 times. Okay, clear, accept, let go, take a breath.
With a therapist that's suggested primarily for negative self-thoughts or negative recall.
Mm-hmm.
So in that way, he saw it as a way of not encumbering yourself with stuff that's already happened that is negative.
Yeah. And again, if you or somebody found that helpful, then I think that's great. So let's do another gap at work. Somebody has an identified gap. There's lots of them. All right.
Like zooming out.
Uh-huh.
For example, like for students,
Uh-huh.
even though it's not work, but studying is a work task.
Right.
Require a lot of focus. So as we were working or focusing on some papers, I noticed like this gap, like zooming out from time to time,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very noticeable. And I would bring back my awareness to
Right.
whatever I'm doing, but it happens very frequently.
Right.
With all the views.
So you're doing a task. So you're a student. You're doing a task, like you're studying something, and then you decide you're going to go out. Right. So that's a gap. So how would you be mindful in the going out? It's a great example. It happens all the time at work. Same thing, you know. Like there's a coffee break. I was suggesting to somebody the other day that they could take a mindful break, but you know, I worked at one point for an insurance company. It was an 8 3/4 hour day. Maybe it was a 9 hour day. We had a half an hour for lunch and 2 15-minute breaks. That's a semi-industrial schedule. Right? So when I went on my coffee break, and you know everybody's clocking to see that you get back. It's like the office, you know. They're clocking to see you get. You didn't take 17 minutes, did you, Callahan? I'm waiting for my turn. So you're going out. What could you do? That would be mindful. And if you didn't have something there, somebody else might jump in. But you get the first try.
Looking at nature, again, like immerse myself in nature.
Uh-huh.
Feel it's like stepping outside, feeling air around me.
So you could be looking at nature, feeling the air, looking at what you see. So that's the tuning into the present. The thing that makes it mindfulness is when you do it on purpose. I mean, you're probably going to go out and look at nature anyway and feel the air or feel the rain or whatever it is that's happening outside. Right? But when you go out and you tune in on purpose and you're present to the tuning in, that's what makes it mindful. So think about coffee break. And you're going from your desk to wherever you take coffee break. Or maybe you're just going to have coffee break at your desk. Right? So you stop what you're doing. The last office I worked in, I would have a thermos, you know, and because I liked my coffee better than the company coffee, and I would pour myself a cup of coffee. I would try to turn off the computer, or at least, you know, it was a laptop, close it. Right? So I'm not sitting there drinking the coffee, and that's not a gap. That's just drinking coffee while working. Right? And it could I be present to lifting the cup, feeling the cup, paying attention on purpose. It doesn't have to be the breath. Right? There's a gap. Tasting the coffee. It's my 15 minutes, or your 15 minutes. So how about a gap from over here? Somebody has to have a gap. Yeah.
Yeah, between receiving a phone call from the receptionist and my client has arrived and walking out and meeting my client.
That's excellent. So a gap between getting the phone call from the receptionist that the client's in the waiting area or they're on their way, and when you walk out to greet them. So how would you practice mindfulness in that? How long is that period? 30 seconds. So that's a great period, right? Because the 30 seconds are going to happen anyway. And the whole point of practicing in the gap is happening anyway. And it's not really a very productive 30 seconds for most things. You can't write another email, you can't make another phone call, you can't do notes in those 30 seconds, right? So you have this 30-second built-in gap. So how would you do it? What would you do to be mindful?
Usually take a breath and roll my shoulders.
That's a great one. Take a breath, roll your shoulders. All of that's directing the attention inward. I was giving this presentation once at a meditation center, and I talked about how in my work, and I can see we're close to the end, so I'm going to bring it to a close here very shortly. I was talking and I asked the audience, the group of people, you know, what's a gap? And the person said, well, when I turn on my computer in the morning, it takes like 30 seconds to, you know, turn on, or a minute. And I said, what do you do? I said, well, I check my email on my cell phone. The laughter is we do that, right? But that's a gap. That's an interruption in an automated process. The computer's turning on. You don't have to do anything. It's doing its thing, right? You could take a breath. You know, be more present. Then whenever it boots up and there you are, you're ready. Right? Is your employer really going to reward you for using that 60 seconds more effectively? I've never had that job where, you know, they were tracking me that closely. So I want to move along because we are close to. Yeah,
I want to add one to that 30
Yeah.
seconds, because I think it's one that all of us have, that opportunity between the client being announced and so when you get up to walk, you actually just feel your feet.
Yeah.
And your attention goes to your feet and it grounds you,
Yeah.
as well as
Yeah.
opening your,
Yeah.
what you suggest is kind of like a heart opener. And so you get up and you ground yourself into your feet.
So we could go on, if we were doing a workshop on this, we could spend an entire day and identify hundreds of gaps. And in each of them, there's the opportunity to practice. But actually, having given this presentation a number of times, I know that people don't. Right? And I like this cartoon. You know, every morning there's more gravity around. The gravity around my bed is 10 times stronger. Right? You know, it's because I don't want to get out of bed. Why is mindfulness so hard if it's so good? And I'm going to suggest 3 really quick things to think about. One is we like to think that work is painful, because then it makes what we're doing feel more important and more difficult. Right? That's not a really good coaching point of view, but that's how we, you know. And then we actually don't want to be present to it because we think it's painful. So being told you could be more present to something that you enjoy thinking is painful is like saying enjoy the dentist visit more. So we sort of have to undo, which is why that presentation at the beginning of we have to sort of reframe how we think about work. And then, to be quite honest, we like our sleepiness. As a meditation teacher and a mindfulness teacher, I can assure you that we are in a very sleepy culture, as distracted and as busy as we are, and we like the dream that we're all having. And the suggestion that you could wake up and be purposefully present and accomplishing something and creating value is a challenge. And most of us prefer the dream to the challenge. So this is a bit of a challenge and a bit of a call to action, right? That we could reconnect with work as an expression of significance, and we could begin applying mindfulness as part of the agent of transforming work. So when I said that why, you know, the significant thing, it's more than just identifying the gap. It's actually we could change the whole way that work happens. And we still have to show up, you know, answer the phone, see the client, you know, go to class, do the study. You still have to do it, but you can change how it is so that that's actually an expression of the best part of you. So, not much of a gap, but there's 5 minutes left. If anybody wants to ask something in the last 5 minutes, I'm happy to entertain a question or two.
Again, so you're, for example, writing an essay, and you have to focus on it for a long period of time. Would you call those brief moments of inattention a gap? When all of a sudden you start fixing on tomorrow's game, or the party next week, or what someone said to you on Facebook or whatever, or you go on Facebook. Are those gaps, or are those just distractions?
Well, if you're present, when you're not, it's a gap in your focus. So I want to unpack your question a bit. You're focusing on long periods of time, and you notice that there are things that are like, so you're focusing on writing something, and then all of a sudden you find you want to look at Facebook, right? Just to do one of the examples. Is that a gap? Well, something happens that's not the focus. So there's a gap in your focus. And you have a choice of how do you want to be in that moment where it switches from being focused to not. The 3 R's practice is practicing noticing that the distraction happened and then bringing your attention back. So you're noticing the gap and then you're coming back. But you could, equally, if you're writing a paper or writing something, go, this is my time, like I need a break. Okay, I'm purposefully choosing a break. I'm going to be present to my Facebook time. Well, that feels different. Instead of, getting sucked into the whole Facebook thing and an hour later you come out. Somebody else? Yeah.
It's just more of a comment. Is what I like is we grew up in a society lately where they say that we multitask, which they've proven really doesn't exist. It's
That's
just
right.
a matter of clicking on and off so fast.
That's right.
It's like pain,
Yeah.
when it happens, you touch yourself, it's painful. It gets up there in a microsecond.
That's right.
So this ties in very nicely with taking advantage of these natural stop and go moments in life.
That's right.
So it takes you away from this multitasking myth, and you can actually go, well, I'm going to have these breaks naturally.
Yeah.
So can I use them? Can I enlarge them? Can I make them purposeful?
Yeah.
And I think that's really helpful.
Thank you. Well said. So we're in a a culture that has had a dream of multitasking, but it's actually a dream because it's not how we actually work. We do one thing at a time. And then there's a lot of positive benefits to both learning how to pay attention and then noticing the changes between one thing and the next. I was reading something today, I think it was in the Harvard Business Review, about attentional focus being one of the keynote leadership skills of the 21st century. We're flooded with data and information and technological demands and social pressures, and the ability to actually stay focused and present will separate a level of accomplishment from just sort of puttering along, getting it done. So, yeah.
I'm immersed in this kind of thinking anyhow, and I'm into radical acceptance and trying that out. I'm finding it really hard to accept the challenging feelings. I mean, obviously, right? Who wants to engage in that and stay with that?
Yeah.
But there's something in the back of my head that's like, there might be some value in doing this. But, it's so hard. I sometimes I'm like, I'd rather not spend my gap time being aware of a painful thought or a stressor.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's a really good place, and I think we're going to end with this question. But what's your first name?
Oh, Alexia.
Alexia.
Yeah.
It's great, Alexia. The whole, the radical acceptance work. And then noticing, if I could paraphrase what you said, like sometimes you just don't want to be mindful and spend your time paying attention to, if what's happening at the present moment is uncomfortable, you just want to have a chocolate bar. Or watch Game of Thrones, I don't know. Like you just want to, have a break, go to Facebook, right? You just want a break. Well, fine, right? Life is a balance, right? So it's not like it all has to be this. But this is a very useful thing. And when you do it, and you do it from the point of view of radical acceptance, of like, now's my time for a break. Now's my time when I give Brian a little time off. I usually have a mystery novel on the go, because I like mystery novels. And it's not thinking about philosophy and psychology. It's like, who did it? And usually I can figure it out, like, how are they going to get there? And it's like, good, it's just an entertainment. So we can be human and relaxed and still work with this. Thank you very much for your kind attention. I'm going to do a very fast bit of show and tell in case you didn't get this. So Mark.